Every generation here has struggled with the generation gap, the tensions between what has been and what the younger generation thinks it should be. Sometimes those tensions break within a congregation. Fortunately, not always. A couple visiting Scotland were visiting a very historic church, and they were being shown around by a guide who mentioned that he had been an elder in that church for 50 years. My, you'll have seen some changes in that time, the visitor said. Yes, he responded, and I've been in every one of them. But the point is, he was still there. He was still an active and involved and dedicated member, doing his part, even though he wasn't comfortable with all the changes that had been made in the 50 years that he'd been an elder. What stories could be told in this congregation? And at anniversary time, I'm sure that you are recalling some of them. You have wonderful memories to share. A huge album of pictures and stories. You have a great past. Honor it. But don't glorify it. A community of faith is a living, dynamic entity for this time and for the years ahead. We have much to learn from the past that helps us to move forward into the present and into the future. Faith doesn't stand still. God leads you forward. And that leading takes account of present realities. The traditions of the past may not be equal to the challenges and the need to consider change. That's the point of our gospel reading this morning. Luke tells us a story of a time when Jesus was questioned about fasting. His questioner said, the followers of John the Baptist, like the Pharisees, fast, but your disciples eat and drink. Fasting was a tradition among the Jewish people. They had built a system into their religious observances. They fasted on Mondays and Thursdays. They often whitened their faces so that everyone could see they were fasting. I guess that those religious people had an idea, still common among some people, that a person was not being religious unless he or she was uncomfortable. Jesus responded, you cannot make wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is among them. In other words, there is an appropriate time for fasting, but not when the party's in full swing. In the ministry of Jesus, there is a celebration of fast, but your disciples eat and drink. Fasting was a tradition among the Jewish people. They had built a system into their religious observances. They fasted on Mondays and Thursdays. They often whitened their faces so that everyone could see they were fasting. I guess that those religious people had an idea, still common among some people, that a person was not being religious unless he or she was uncomfortable. Jesus responded, you cannot make wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is among them. In other words, there is an appropriate time for fasting, but not when the party's in full swing. In the ministry of Jesus, there is a celebration of God's presence and the affirmation of the kingdom of heaven. To fast when Jesus is around is completely out of place. That would be missing the point. Missing God's point. Jesus continues his discussion of religious traditions with two images describing the incompatibility between the new and the old. No one sews a new piece of cloth on an old garment. No one puts new wine into old wineskins. Jesus observes that no reasonable person would sew an unshrunk patch onto an old piece of clothing. The first time the garment was washed, the new patch would shrink and make a new tear. Similarly, no sensible person would pour young green wine into old seasoned wineskins. The new and still fermenting wine would expand and burst the old wineskins. This double parable of our Lord illustrates the surprising features of Jesus' ministry, how different it was. It also illustrates the futility of trying to make new truths and ideas he brought fit into conventional, rigid, religious expectations. Again, that would be missing God's point. Then, as now, there is in some religious people a kind of passion for what is old. Nothing moves more slowly than a church. Nothing is slower to make decisions than a church. Nothing is more skeptical about new ideas than a church. Remember those last 7 words of the church? I wonder if they were heard around here over the past 153 years. We've never done it that way before. This parable of our Lord is a challenging teaching from him that new and old are incompatible. Every community of faith needs to redo and to renew. It's interesting and I think important that the Greek word that Luke uses to describe the new wineskins can be translated reconditioned, renewed, refreshed. In the Christian church, the Spirit of God calls us and equips us, sometimes admittedly kicking and screaming, to a radical rethinking of the ways we do things, so that we meet the challenges and opportunities not of the last century, but of the present time and the present realities. A century and a half ago, when this congregation was formed, one item that wasn't even considered was an organ. For instrumental music was not considered holy. And all the diatribes held in the Scots again that kiss the whistles. But how much has been added to our worship by good music? And are we open to having our worship renewed and refreshed by other gifts and choices that may be new and unfamiliar to us? Back then, there were no women ministers or elders. But how much has been improved in the ministry and mission of the Presbyterian Church in Canada in the past 40 years by the ordination of women. The leadership of women in the church has changed the church in many good ways.